As we've done a deeper dive into the scriptures that influenced and shaped the message and work of Jesus of Nazareth, I have been constantly surprised by the connections between the Old Testament and the New Testament. As Christians, too often we think of the Old Testament as interesting, but not all that important since the incarnation of Jesus Christ. But it is these scriptures that Jesus came to fulfill. And to understand the depth of Jesus' message, it is important to understand the holy word about which he was speaking all the time. The Hebrew scriptures are really intricately woven into the words and the acts of Jesus Christ. And by reading the prophets, we understand the urgency and the radical nature of our faith. The prophet Jeremiah was the first person who spoke about a central tenet of our Christian faith: having a personal relationship with the Lord. Along with Isaiah and Ezekiel, Jeremiah is one of the major prophets. And Jeremiah is sometimes referred to as the weeping prophet. He truly laments the condition of Israel throughout his prophecies. He laments because he loves God and he loves his people. And he mourns not only for their sins, but also for the consequences of those sins, which have now thrown them into exile, poverty, and extraordinary spiritual pain. It's kind of like seeing a loved one totally mess up their lives. Warning them time and again, pleading with them to make a change in direction, and then seeing them destroy themselves. In such a case, when we love that person, and even when we've tried intervention, it gives us no satisfaction that they suffer. We don't glibly say, well, I told you so, or I guess you got what you deserve. We are in pain with them, and we are heartbroken too. That's how Jeremiah was feeling during his prophecies. Unlike some of the prophets, Jeremiah did not speak of things to come. He wasn't warning the people ahead of time, but what he was doing was telling the story to the survivors and the children of the survivors who were in exile. The Assyrian exile had already taken place, and Jeremiah was speaking in the aftermath, hoping that the people would begin understanding why they were suffering and what they needed to do about it. He gave advice about how to manage living in exile. And while the people were down, he infused them with energy and hope for the future. He called them to self-examination, which is one of our disciplines in Lent. However, this was a time of pain as they looked at their own downfall, as they owned their personal part in it, either by ungodly actions or by ungodly inaction. We remember that before everything fell apart, things have been really good. There had been a strong national revival and a renewed commitment to Yahweh. However, this attitude of began slipping into complacency. And they started having an almost irrational belief that, hey, no matter what they did, they could rely on Yahweh to come and save them and protect them and bless them. And while the people continued to honor God and be grateful, their assumptions did work. But there was a line that they were not allowed to cross. And that was the line of God's sovereignty. Think about how parents are more likely to bend the rules here and there if they feel loved and respected by their children. When love and respect is there, we are more likely to bend the curfew rule a little, or give a little extra TV time, or allow a cookie before supper. But when children show no respect and appreciation, we are more likely to become even stricter about the rules. And we tend to look upon every word the child says and every action the child takes. We become suspicious of them. When the people of Israel started dancing around a fire, offering sacrifices to pagan gods, they crossed a line. And then God allowed the consequences of sin to come upon them. And it came upon them like a raging storm, destroying their belongings and scattering them from the promised land. For 29 chapters, Isaiah rages about the behaviors and attitudes that got the people out of Israel and into exile and poverty. He stomps around. He is so angry and convicts them of their sin. When they were in exile, they cried, well, how did this happen to us? And the prophet reviews their fall, and he connects the dots. And then he turns to the people and he says, so, children of God, what have you learned? Chapters 30 to 33 are known as the Book of Consolation, because God speaks words out of this tragedy, words of hope, words of comfort, and even words of joy. Jeremiah, speaking with God's voice, proclaims that the people will be led back to Judah, but this time things are going to be different. They will worship Yahweh with full devotion on the inside as well as the outside. The people will be in a real relationship with God. Tucked away in chapter 31, verse 34, I discovered a nugget of gold that I had never seen before. And no longer shall each person teach their neighbor to know the Lord, for they shall all know me. They shall all know me. How do you know another? We might have a casual knowing is, oh yeah, I know her, which means I could probably pick her out of a lineup. We may know people on the surface by exchanging a bit of conversation here and there, knowing enough to be able to understand their family connections, maybe their politics, or even their favorite color. But there's another kind of knowing that goes very deep and cannot be erased by time or distance. This is the kind of knowing that God speaks of for God's people, for us. They shall know me is certainty and it's surety. We are to discern God in us, around us, and in others. People may ask, well, how do you do that? We do it just like we learn to really know anyone or anything profoundly. We spend time with God. We eat meals with God. We sing with God. We spend long hours in the night or in the woods or at the beach just being with God, learning, listening, and speaking. We learn to listen to the other and begin to pick up cues that are more nuances than spoken word. We learn what pleases God and what really annoys God. We learn what makes God laugh and what makes God cry. We observe. We give ourselves to this relationship with all our heart and our mind and our spirit. We learn to see things and people as God sees. We learn to see God in others, all others. We have a personal relationship with God, not private, but personal. It is God's desire that we know each other in such a way, and we know that God is with us always. Thanks to Jeremiah's words about personal responsibility and having an individual relationship with the one God, the Jews actually maintained their identity during their 70 years of exile. And Judaism was transformed in that process. They did come back to the promised land, and they were different people. They would rebuild not just the temple, but they would rebuild their faith in their lives. Jeremiah said there would be a new covenant between God and the people. A new covenant was necessary because Israel's sin had totally invalidated the Mosaic covenant. The internal transformation of the people makes it possible for them to obey the law of love and to live righteously again. This time, the law of love was not written on tablets, but on the minds and the hearts of the people. They would actually possess it and carry it with them. That's why people would no longer know of God, but know God. God's love would be with them. And this is exactly what Jesus Christ came to literally embody for us. He owned the words of the prophets. He too spoke of the new covenant, the covenant of love, that is not new in a sense of learning something we didn't know, but actually living it, knowing it so well that it's in our breath. This incarnational theology of the Old and New Testaments is the same in Jeremiah as it is in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. The covenant is a personal relationship with the living Lord. Jesus taught us that. He begged us to embrace it. He sealed it in our hearts by both his death and his resurrection. It's our job, our life's work, to know, to draw closer and closer to the Lord in a real relationship, and to offer that knowing and relationship to others who haven't met the Lord, who haven't bothered growing a relationship in their own hearts and minds and souls. When we ask ourselves or others, do you know the Lord? This is what it means. Not have you met. Not do you know God's name. Not do you spend an hour together here and there. And not even can you rattle off a creed or a mission statement. That's not what it means. Do you know the Lord? It's a question for the least to the greatest, from the youngest of our members to the oldest. And it is a question for our consideration as we journey toward the day of resurrection.